Hello, and welcome to episode 31 of Poetry Worth Hearing, hosted by me, Kathleen McPhillamy, and with music by Alex Heen. This episode features a substantial interview with the Welsh poet Tony Curtis, who talks about his life in poetry and his most recent collection, Leaving the Hills. The idea of moving or leaving is picked up in the rest of the episode. The theme was moving, to be interpreted as liberally as poets chose, so that we have a selection of poems that concern anything from physical movement to emotion. The poets are Maggie Hall, Heather Moulson, Richard Lister, Lizzie Ballagher, Dinah Livingstone, Fiona Perry, Helen Overell, Kate Young, Adam Shaw, and Michael Klimeš. We begin this episode with Tony Curtis, who, as well as having had a long and distinguished career as a poet himself, has also, in his capacity as Professor, now Emeritus, of Creative Writing at the University of South Wales, nurtured the careers of many others, including Tammy Yoseloff, Claire Crowther and Jane Clark, whilst working alongside the likes of Gillian Clark, Philip Gross and many other lecturers and guests. Tony acknowledges in particular the influence on him of Danny Absey, who was a long-term friend and mentor. In this interview, Tony talks about his career in poetry and reads from his new book, Leaving the Hills.
I'm in my 78th year and have just published my 11th collection, Leaving the Hills. Now, all this started a long time ago. I was in a school in Tenby in Pembrokeshire and wanted to have something in the school magazine and wrote what I thought was a poem, and they was silly enough to publish it. And the moment you see your name on something, the moment you can claim ownership to something, you're kind of caught. And that snagging of me happened around about 1965. I went on to Swansea University and to read history and English. And my determination to write grew until by that Christmas, my parents, who didn't have a lot of money, were persuaded or cajoled to buy me a typewriter, a little Olivetti. And the moment I had that, that was my badge. That was my entry into being a real writer. So I wrote through the 4 years that I had in Swansea. I did a PGCE and started to publish in meaningless little gestetted things. But there were some other wannabe poets there, and there was a kind of warmth in the despair of that. And then just before I finished, Roland Mathias at the Anglo-Welsh Review, which is the major publication in Wales at that time, took a poem and he paid me for it. So that I really was caught at that point. And then I won a little prize in college and entered teaching with the idea that I would continue alongside of my day job being a poet. And so that happened. Moving on a little bit, by 72, I'd won a Gregory Award, and that was a sort of rubber stamping of my legitimacy as a poet. I think Danny Absey and Seamus Heaney had both been involved in that. Went to the States with the money, always wanted to do that. We were working class kids, but used that money to go to the States and published a pamphlet of poems. Not any pamphlet of poems, but something called Walk Down a Welsh Wind. It is an embarrassingly sub-Dylanic title, but it was in the Peterloo Pamphlet Poet series run by Harry Chambers. Now, I didn't realize at the time, this was quite a big deal. Harry Chambers has been very much involved with the Northern Irish renaissance of Longley and Muldoon and Carson and people in Belfast. And I was number 18 in the series of 3 sixes. Other people included Marn and Longley and Heaney. And this was really quite something. I suppose I was the least known poet to be included in that series. And that was another legitimizing of what I felt I should do. The problem with young poets is they don't have anything to write about. They think they do. And they write about their angst and their loneliness and stuff. And actually, that's boring. But going to the States gave me some more subject matter and broadened my horizons. And pretty soon, I'd escaped from teaching. I did 5 years school teaching, or as we like to call it now, missionary work in England, taking English to the English. And then I got a training college job. And suddenly, everything opened up. I didn't have to work 9 to 5. I sort of popped in and it was very civilized. And I suppose the time that I had, although I had a young family at the time, gave me the encouragement to focus more. So that takes us up to the mid-70s. And by this stage, I'd had a first collection out from a small Welsh publisher called Christopher Davis. The book was called Album. And that gives a clue, really. There were poems there about photographs. And the way I found I could get away from myself, away from those narrow, personal, self-indulgent issues, was to look at photographs, look at other people's work. And I've continued doing that right up to the present book, which has photographs in it. I also had the good fortune to be given as a Christmas present in the early 80s a book called Artists at War, and by my wife. And I'd been interested in this idea of someone not just being a writer, an artist, but being officially conscripted, as it were, and even put in uniform to cover something so important as war. That took me out of myself, because at that time, in the early 80s, I'd just come back from the United States, where I did an MFA in creative writing in Goddard College, Vermont. Met a lot of really interesting people there. I was the only Brit who ever did the course. I was a bit confused. I was kind of Tony in Wonderland. But amongst the faculty there were really quite significant people like Robert Hass, Heather McHugh, and Louise Glick, who went on to win the Nobel Prize. People like Raymond Carver passed through, and Richard Ford and Howard Moss. It was really an astonishing experience. At the same time, my father had died. And so there I was on an American campus where very much the aesthetic was one of confessional poetry. And I heard all this stuff about my father. And so I wrote a lot of poems about that and came back and published a book in 1981 called Preparations. And I had to do that, but they're very personal poems. But I found out that every time I gave a poetry reading, I would break down in tears. So the book that my wife got me about Artists at War gave me a kind of fictional remove, gave me somebody else's life, much more important war experience to write about. And that's what I did. And pretty soon I had a group of poems, one of which won the National Poetry Prize in 1984, which was really a big deal. The death of Richard Beatty Seaman in the Belgian Grand Prix, 1939, it's about the longest title you could possibly imagine, won the prize, and then that really got things going. If you want to be a writer, read other writers. And one of the first poems in my new book is Longley's work. Sadly, Michael Longley died a few weeks before this recording. I met him a couple of times, but I always kept one of his books, as you can hear, by my bedside. Longley's work. Your books I keep on the shelf beside my pillow, slim and strong stalks full of sap and bearing flowers. It's right to be reminded. Heed to your place. Heed to your people. Be true to your language. Yours is not my land, Michael, or places I have been. Dúnachtri, Inishturk, Glenloch, Carrickskewen. Nor would I recognize your familiars, golden plover, greenshank, mallard, the cloud orchid. Still, I'll open at a random page this morning, as I do, splashing the sleep from my face with the cold, peaty water of your words. I was delighted that was published in Ireland's Poetry Review, and it's an homage. It's a fan letter to Michael Longley. Longley, his compatriot Seamus Heaney, about whom I wrote the first book. These people have been very important to me, though, as I say, their world, their townland, their place is not mine. But reading poets with the strength and the particular grace, energy, and pertinence of those sends me back to the page and concentrates my mind. So if I'm trying to do anything, I'm trying to heed to my place, my life. So the new book, Leaving the Hills, has a section linked to photographs. Everybody knows the word Aberfan. Back in Swansea University, when I was in my second year as an undergraduate, the awful tragedy struck that little mining village in the valleys. We couldn't get there. Some people from the university grabbed a van and tried to go over and dig, but they probably got in the way. 50 years later, in 2016, I was approached by someone to address the Aberfan situation and to write some poems. And along with the Welsh language poet, Graham Davis, we worked on a sequence of poems based on photographs of Aberfan. There was a guy called Chuck Rappaport. He was a young Jewish New York photographer. And he went to his editor at the New York Times and said, let me go and photograph that Welsh village. And the editor said, no, that was a couple of months ago. That story's moved on. He said, no, let me go there now and see a couple of months on how they're dealing with it. And it was a brilliant idea. And what he came up with were sensitive, wonderful evocations of how you deal with pain, how you deal with trauma. And he became, as we would now say, embedded in that community. So it's a wonderful sequence of photographs that Chuck did. And so in the new collection, bringing together that idea of photographs and being objective, looking at something from the outside and developing poetry from it. I'll read the first poem from The Six of Mine, Aberfan Voices, after the photographs of I.C. Rappaport, 1966. And the photograph has, in the foreground, are two huge sacks of coal, and a little boy dwarfed behind them is a very white-faced boy. He's holding a toy aeroplane, ready to fly. One day, when I'm grown up, I will fly a real aeroplane from London or Cardiff or America, and we will fly over Wales, and I will look out of the window and point and say, down by there is where we lived, that little village in a valley. No, not that valley, the other one with the green slopes and the new houses. And see, that new building, the school. And the sun will shine on the River Taff, clean and silver, with the children playing and fishing. And being so high, we'll have to imagine the fish they catch. But we will know the faces of the children. A selection of my poems about war from over several years came out about 20 years ago, called War Voices. It's the idea of voice that still keeps me going as a writer. Not my voice. My voice is old and smug and tired, successful old white guy, as a poetry editor once said to me. Well, okay, but I can be other people. And I think as writers, we have the obligation, the challenge to get into the spirit and the psyche of other people. I hope I've caught that little boy there, who's probably now my age, and one of the survivors of Aberfan. What must it have been like to look down on that later? Leaving the Hills has a number of photographs, as I say, one of a boxer called Jimmy Wilde, a world championship boxer, and another of Debussy and his daughter in France at Le Mulot in 1916. But the cover of the book originally had a photograph as well. It had a photograph from the LA Times, 1961, of the Bel Air wildfire. The book now doesn't have that. It has a wonderful color painting by the Welsh-American artist Hanlon Davis, who's a long-standing friend of mine, and who, along with my other American friends, I shall probably never see again, partly to do with my age, and partly due to the fact that I don't think I can bear to go to America in the current regime. Anyway, Leaving the Hills, the title poem, is set in 1961. It's a wildfire, an historical fact. How could that possibly happen again? But we know it happens time and time again, and we're just recovering or not recovering from the latest wildfire. Anyway, Leaving the Hills deals with another creative artist in California. As I say, in 1961, Aldous Huxley was there. Huxley, together with a number of other writers and artists, went to Hollywood because there you could make your fortune. I don't think he did make a fortune, but he made enough money to get by and live quite happily, as you can discover in the poem. When the fire comes, he and other celebs and minor celebs, as a couple of weeks ago, are burned out. Leaving the Hills. As we are driven away, I watch the Packard's mirrors become tiny screens of flames. The Hollywood Hills ablaze like a film set, with our house center focus being consumed. Because that's what life does here, consume. So what is lost? The lost Havanas Groucho gave me in the box he drew on, a lady's opera fan, a tenor's waxed moustache inked in as if to say, what are you going to say? My mother's Chesterfield, father's bureau, curtains and carpets shift from heels, a friend's blade from Balliol, the summer eights, and photographs. Greta in baggy trousers, the face of a goddess hidden under the brim of a large floppy hat. Against the banks of a dried out river, at one of our picnics, two figures, Charlie and Anita, the most famous dwarves in the world, Cecil called them when he borrowed my Rolleiflex. Standing before Personnage Oiseau, Russell, who, rather dismissively, I recall, pronounced that exquisite Jean Moreau playful, as a great philosopher might. And all the books, Isherwood's Goodbye to Berlin, inscribed to us, Whiston's poems with its constant scratchings out, a well-thumbed Ulysses from Shakespeare and Co., the decades of diaries, Maria's and mine, the manuscripts that would have been my last works, all overtaken by flames. And as we were halted at a red light before Hollywood Boulevard en route, rooms hurriedly booked at the Chateau Marmont, I started to float, my body's weight left there on the cool leather of the limousine. I felt extraordinarily clean, extraordinarily clear. Given more time, that could have been a fresh start. I choose to call the collection Leaving the Hills and to lead off with that poem because I feel at my time of life, if fire breaks out, what do you grab from your house? What do you try and preserve? And I suppose in my 11th collection, I'm revisiting things and also picking up the sort of things that I wish to preserve. There may not be a blade from Balliol or a cigar box inscribed by Groucho Marx, but there are things and there are memories. And the poems in Leaving the Hills try and locate and preserve those. My previous book, remarkably, and to my great surprise, and to the great surprise of anyone who got to know me, I published a novel. A novel, he said in inverted commas. It's a metafiction. It's called Darkness in the City of Light. Leaving the Hills was taken by Mick Felton, my editor at Seren Books, who sadly died a few months ago. And his crazy decision to take this almost novel paid off because it was shortlisted for Paul Torday Prize from the Society of Authors. It's set in wartime Paris. So again, that picking up of history, that picking up of other people's lives, other people's memoirs and histories is key to this. And it concerns an evil doctor, Dr. Marcel Petiot, who was the most notorious serial killer in France in the 20th century or since. I was interested in Paris as an occupied city, and I was interested in Dr. Marcel Petiot as an occupied psyche or spirit by the evil that overtook him, which would have been there whether the Nazis had marched in and controlled the city or not. But it's got photographs in it. Well, there's a surprise. And it's mainly prose, but it's got letters and it's got poems in it. And all the boring bits are true, and all the interesting bits are the bits that I made up. Or is it vice versa? It's a metafiction with notes at the end of it, and the notes are also part of the game playing, really. But one of the poems, which forms part of this novel, I was originally in Leaving the Hills. It was a poem that I thought was good enough to put in a collection, but as it had already been in the novel, there it takes its place. This is Taking Line 5, January 1945. This workday morning on the metro at Gare du Nord, a man got onto the crowded car, one of the disparus, those returning from the camps, forced labor, some dissidents. a rare dew, a steady trickle now after the flood. And though he wore no yellow star, and there was no visible tattoo, he wore his suffering clearly, the blackened teeth, the sallow skin, ill-fitting clothes, and that distant stare, the empty eyes of a Mussulman whose vision had been worn out with horrors. The old lady, wearing entre-deux-gueux Chanel tweed, jewels, and a fox fur, rose out of her seat and offered it to him. Monsieur, ici. The carriage went quiet. We all looked down at our feet, not wishing to witness one of the walking dead. And nothing was said. Nothing was said. If there's any fuel in the tank, if there's any juice left in me as an aged writer, it's that I want to get into situations that I couldn't possibly have experienced myself. I want to get into historical situations or fictional situations and find a voice for them, to find a voice that isn't my own. I live in a house that's full of art as well as books, and that's important to me. And getting to know artists and writing about them and being inspired them has been important to me as well. There's a sequence of poems in Leaving the Hills called A Jazz Suite. 5 jazz characters: Billie Holiday, Scott LaFaro, a lesser-known bass player, Charlie Bird Parker, Stan Getz, and the wonderful Dave Brubeck. I'll read the Stan Getz, scattering Stan Getz, which takes us back to the West Coast again. And remember, the book originates with Huxley in Los Angeles. Scattering Stan Getz. East of the sun and west of the moon, go your ashes into the endless Pacific. Off the coast of Malibu, in blazing blue June, friends and family on a yacht that rides the swell of the ocean swaying baseline. With your record playing, Billy Strayhorn's Blood Count, blocking out the gulls and the waves. Over the melancholy matter of goodbyes, life blown defiant. I've got a big sound. It's deceptively mellow, but it carries. It's night music, the sad music of the going man. Then ashes poured from your saxophone case by your grandson. I think when you get old, you're looking back on a lot of things. You're also looking forward, and what you're looking forward to is the inevitability of death. I love that. Stan Getz, wonderful jazz sax player, and one of the last albums he did with Kenny Barron, the pianist, is a magical, spiritual manifestation of what it is to be alive, what it is to be mortal. Earlier in the book, there's a poem that relates more to my death. My wife and I are on a charity committee that helped to run a graveyard that's fallen into disrepair, where my grandparents in Carmarthen are buried. Eglwys Dewi St. David's Church. The church itself, the church building, is now a climbing club. I don't mind that. That's life going on. I eventually put a proper headstone over my grandparents' grave, and I left a space for me. My ashes will be scattered there. The climbing centre is called the Overhang. So this is climbing the overhang at Eglwys Dewi Sant, Carmarthen. Rusted nails, the slip of loosened slates, another and another. The place is open to the weather, rain from the west, snow from the east, complete the wrecking work, and then it's too late. The church throws good money after bad to patch the holes. A small fortune goes up into the clouds that come over the Irish Sea. So the place is sold. The pews are plastered by pigeons, the font a dry stone, the pulpit silent and soiled. The wooden list of the Great War's dead and the marble plaques to the Crachach, Williamses, Pictons, Davises fade back into the dusty shade. In the churchyard, to the rear and towards the town, 7 war graves decline, their greying Portland headstones sinking into a maze of barbed brambles. We shall strain to remember them. Your grandmother and grandfather's marble chips and small urn persist against the weeds and ivy under the ancient yew. You call and tidy up each time that you pass through. Though now you have to negotiate the parked cars, families using the climbing and bouldering centre that rears from the nave and vestry, a church repurposed. The angled grips and coloured footholds pattern the walls like stained glass. Some star exploding from its last millennium. The overhang. It's a tough climb, roped and helmeted, harnessed and gloved. They spider their way to heaven. There's a poem in Leaving the Hills, a short poem called The 4-Minute Warning. God knows how far away we are from the next nuclear crisis. But in the 50s, it was serious. And later on, of course, there were serious issues about the bomb dropping. And at the same time, there was a wonderful, perhaps the quintessential moment of English-British amateur success. In Oxford on the 6th of May in 1954, a postgraduate medic ran the mile in 3 minutes, 59.4 seconds, broke the world record, the first man to break the 4-minute mile. And that man was an astonishing man, Roger Bannister, a major neurosurgeon and then master of Oxford College and a knighted academic. And he was training in a hospital in London, finished a shift, went down to the technical room, sharpened up the spikes on his running pumps, got on a train, got off at Oxford, and he and two friends ran round the Iffley Road track and created history. The 4-minute warning. They were always ahead of the clock. Braysher first, Bannister second, Chataway third. All the rest left behind and forgotten. Bit part actors, spear carriers behind the three princes. 4 times round the oval track at Iffley Road. The 2 pacemen switching as planned. Pavilion and stands packed with students in Macintoshes, smoking, cadets, and a smattering of girls taken out for an early May blow. As he crossed the line and fell into the arms of his coach, Bannister could hear only the sound of a distant seashore of applause and cheers. Now at least, when the bomb fell and the mushroom blossomed over our land, a man in those 4 minutes could run a mile. In the 50s, there was an absurdity to world events, and unfortunately, that there is in this century and in our decade too. There's a poem called Cinderella, and again, from reading, and I get a lot of ideas from the London Review, lots of other places as well, TV, radio. The London Review books allows you to have vast knowledge without actually reading the books. The reviews are so brilliant. Came across this story, which I then researched. Cinderella is about the most famous English ballet dancer and choreographer of the 20th century ever, Sir Frederick Ashton, who, as I was writing the poem, was celebrated by a royal ballet performance at the Royal Opera House in London back last year. Now, where did he come from, Ashton? Well, I'll tell you. Cinderella. So the young Ashton boy we met in Ecuador before the war is quite the thing in London and the theatre. His Cinderella was most affecting. I swear I was close to tears at the poor girl's predicament, and then elated by her transformation as the belle of the ball, as if one did not know the whole story. We also saw his facade at the Wells Theatre with Margot Fonteyn and Robert Helpman, most entertaining in an entirely light-hearted way, and mercifully short. The modern dance is done with a great wit and humour. Frederick's talked of as a genius. What on earth goes on inside the heads of the young? That shy boy of 8 was a dark horse, though always this way inclined, I thought. We had a brief word after the performance. Frederick is one of the 4 boys in the Ashton family. The others, the practical ones, run the business now poor George has gone, in the most distressing circumstances. Many a man is driven mad by the natives and the heat. Frederick and the others must have been so badly shaken by that loss. And Georgina, left to cope in that large estate, with servants and workers, such a responsibility. Next Saturday, we sail back on the long voyage to Peru. Those oil fields will not pump themselves, as Bill always says. At the end of our visit that time to Guayaquil, George Ashton offered us 2 slaves, a boy of 7, already trained, and his little sister of 3, a pretty thing with large, dark eyes. They were to cost 40 souks for the boy and 20 for the girl. No more than a handful of guineas then. Those who buy them have to both feed and educate them. I confess to being more than a little surprised by the offer. In any case, we did not take them. We were well staffed in Lima. But the poor things might have been better off with us, I suppose. Another world, another time, whatever happens to such as those. I come across that fact with excitement. Frederick Ashton, the creator of escapist beauty, the ballet, the opera, are those art forms which take us so far away from ourselves and yet persuade us that they address something in ourselves. And where he'd come from was part of that British colonial cruelty. How do you square that circle? Well, you can't. And by taking the voice of another person, that posh member of the audience in the ballet, I hope I'm drawing that irony without it being too obvious or too cute. But I like that. I like that idea of voices and dramatic monologues. And at the end of the day, I suppose some of the poems of mine which will last will be those.
Many thanks to Tony Curtis. More details of his new book and other work can be found at poetryworthhearing.biz, as can information on other poets and texts of unpublished poems. The prompt for this episode was moving, which poets have interpreted in many different ways. Maggie Hall, in this long poem, takes us on a cruise.
Welcome to room 14303. You are on P&O, cruising with an apparent failure to vote. We remind you of this notice. Disembarkation, Surrey Hills, crossing Eddy Avenue, on Randall. It's beef and Guinness pie with creamy mashed peas and gravy at Shakespeare Hotel. I'm thinking of the sticky date pudding with vanilla ice cream and butterscotch sauce for $12. The Electoral Commissioner for New South Wales wants me to pay a fine. Back on P&O at the jewellery shop. Guess the carat weight for a prize draw ticket. The entertainment trivia. A heartstopper on Love Island. It's not too hot to handle if you're square pegs. Totally fried. Don't forget the janitor and the game show, man. Santa's little helper. And the final chess piece, Inventing Anna on a Wednesday. The Tiger Man is not dead, just frustrated. P&O brings us all together. Priority embarkation, and tonight it's karaoke. Rod Stewart, You Go to My Head. Saturday Night Stomp and a Heart of Glass, Blondie. Time warping to that funky music. Tomorrow is the big pub quiz. It's bonus round 4. Disney with a Rose, Moana and Bruno Mars. Film quotes. The Wizard of Oz, A Sixth Sense and Jaws. Flags of red, blue and white. Moreton Bay is our destination, but along came a cyclone, and so it's Hobart for the day. Tasman Island cruises, Port Arthur. We have plenty of free parking, toilet facilities and a gift shop. By the Iron Pot there's a lighthouse on a rock, purpose-built for exploring the coast in a small group. An alternative route, surfing the peaks, wearing dramatic pink. It's a one-day music fest. Goodbye, plastic. I'm just a girl wearing my pink pearl and silver ring, stepping back onto the ship, searching for my glasses. It seems most people are still yet to board, as I have the whole top deck to myself. What a treasure. Back to the quiz board and at Starbucks, Ben and Jerry's ice cream with cola. There's something about Mary downhill skiing. Good times, going to watch Sideshow Alley, sipping a cocktail on the edge of deck 16 midship. Going back to my cabin to read the to-do list, important information. Listen to the captain announce as you sail away. There is a smoking policy and alcohol is prohibited. I asked for the set list after they performed, and here it is. Nutbush, Viva la Vida, Mercy, September, Hey Baby, Oh Sweet Caroline, Bang Bang, Jump Mr. Brightside, and Don't Stop Believing. Pacific Adventure Fact Sheet, built in 2001 as the Golden Princess, Registry, London, United Kingdom. I never knew the organ was known as the King of Instruments. In hindsight, it's obvious. Night 3, Mega Movie Mania. The extraterrestrial is ghosting an unchained melody, while Mrs. Doubtfire is on Breakback Mountain. Dirty Dancing with a Psycho sucking on candy. We go south. Rocky and Eye of the Tiger. Cool Runnings in a Masquerade. And Jack took my necklace. Enjoy the rest of your cruise, and thank you for choosing P&O for your holiday. You can pick up your confiscated items on the way out. Make sure to recycle your cruise card. It's plastic. Quote of the day. True friendship resists time, distance, and silence. Isabel Allende.
Our next poet is Richard Lister with 2 poems.
'98 Rock are playing Metallica's Ride the Lightning. Good tunes to keep you awake on a night shift. Hetfield singing Time is like a fuse, and the first girder snaps like a strand of raw spaghetti. Then, fast as a jet, bridge trusses fail in a wave, arch after arch. The deck upends yellow cold planers, dump trucks, cars slide, spin, fall. Steaming asphalt sloshes free, slurs the lanes with tumbling, boiling black. And Diago, in smudged, reflective orange kit, steel toe-capped boots, mug of tea, black and 2, falls. 15 stories. Mississippi 1, Mississippi 2, Mississippi 3. Hits the water at 70 miles per hour. Served cold. Minkisi, British Museum, London. Brooding blackened sculpture, container of power drawn from the dead. Enclosed by glass, fingerprint smudged, slight break in one corner. Your face, impassive, body pierced by 100 nails like a tortured Christ. Cut and crafted by the Congo people, swindled from the land they named by Portuguese men, fair-skinned like me. Does your rage still fester? Your label. To provoke a Minkisi to action, it must be insulted or have metal driven into its body. But you already have. I feel your stare like you're searching my face. I turn away and stop. Is that the sound of glass cracking? I start to run.
And now Dinah Livingstone takes us back to Dante and a different kind of motion.
This poem is called Dante's Divine Comedy. He lost his Beatrice, and after that was exiled from his city in the tumult of its politics, and lost his way in a dark wood. After an epic trek, with Virgil as his guide, down through hell's lowest circle and then back, he came out and saw the stars again, climbed Mount Purgatory to paradise, where he was met by Beatrice. The one who went up was the one who descended to the deepest depths, there reclaiming what had been suppressed to achieve integrity. Then he was able to mount on high, leading captivity captive, to reach the happy state where, finally, now what ran the will and the desires like a smoothly rolling wheel was love that moves the sun and the other stars.
I think it would be fair to describe Fiona Perry's poem as ekphrastic, and I have posted a copy of the Kandinsky painting I think she refers to in poetryworthhearing.biz.
Flow. After the Painting, Winter Landscape by Vasily Kandinsky. Buttercup Snowfest, gold coins in smouldering daubs. We marched through their showy largesse, faces lit lovingly as if captured in an old movie still. Cool-minded, travelling with the ice flow, happy to drift. And we keep gliding as the copse grows taller, tipping its sugar glass rays onto the place we're meant to be.
Heather Moulson has interpreted the prompt literally and as emotion in her poem.
Moving. Mum saves up her embassy coupons to replace the old pan cooking my porridge. I really think she should get me a Cindy doll because my only friend's moving to Norwich. Doorstep toast emerges from under the grill and my brother has nicked the jam. I'll be alone in the midst of the playground and no one seems to give a damn. I say goodbye to Lynn, shivering in her mac, standing outside her former front door. I now faced a long, lonely walk to school, and my mum asks what I'm crying for.
In her poem, Helen Overell takes us from the ritual dance of cranes to a different rite of passage.
Wattled cranes. They are tall as a man, and with great wings outspread in dance. Dip of head, bow to the ground, courtly as any couple, and sprung leaps, feathers that flutter and sway, and each move given and renewed, as in shallows where sedge and water lilies flourish above doubles that reach to rippled sky in a lifelong tether. And this held freedom is the measure the birds tread on the brow of the hill. The woman watches, her husband beholds her, and with arms wide they honour each other with deep salutation. Straighten up, freighted with years, and step here and there in a rise and fall that wheels and swoops, puts a shape to the loss of the son they bore, grown and gone.
Next, Kate Young with 2 poems.
Pastels. The soulful tones peer from a box, soft pastel limbs needing human touch. I oblige, peel back their outer clothing. We have been asked to capture movement in the style of Degas, dancers drifting, flutters of chiffon in moondust and sky. I lift the palest blue, feel its chalkiness, and attempt to coax it, stroke it to life. Microscopic cells of animation forming. It takes me to you, aqua butterflying over the stage, all wings and ballet shoes, your instep spooning new leather. A willow supple spine draws me in, takes me to that place before the tumour shaped you inert, fixed you on its page. My wrist has finished its whirligig dance. I search for movement. My art is static. The tutor's expert hand brings you to life. Silver birch. As a young man, he was oak, strong, dependable, slightly austere in that colonial Englishman sort of way, his body sturdy, too thick for small limbs to envelop, abrasive bark leaving scraped skin. Look at him now, this thinning man, silvered hair, uncombed wisps skimming the wind in cobwebs, still majestic but tangled at times, the sap and pulp of him exposed, struggling to find the light. Snapshots. The fit is extraordinary. A tiny fist curls round a finger, rosebud lips opening, closing, clamped to the seam of a breast. A blocky school squat on concrete rises, a monster with gated teeth. A small palm nuzzled inside another, the safety of the mother shell. Independence looms. The hand uncouples itself, exploring the hands of others, jostling, teasing, mobiles locked in crab claws. An auditorium. Applause, slick fingers ease over keys, jazz spirals take flight, lifting, falling, always poised on the edge of a question. A wedding photo. Confetti rain drizzling her braid, her veil, eyes like fireflies. A moon and sun circling, hands singing a new tune. Changes emerge. Time drags its ragged breath over liver skin. Her son's hand soothing the mother shell, her veins rooting for light. Grief, a leaden sky. A tiny fist curls round a finger, rosebud lips, opening, closing, clamped to the seam of a breast.
Michael Klimeš's first poem reflects on how people can pass through our lives, while the second brings back powerful memories of the school bus.
What happened to Mags? Mags cleans the 3-storey house I stay in. That is how we met. She smokes constantly, coughs between life stories. The Yorkshire summer has been patchy sun mixed with showers. That has made the countryside that goes forever around Howden gleam wet. I run 3 times each week to break the boredom, as I do shifts at the Press Association. It's a big glass mausoleum office, alive on the weekdays and empty at the weekends. I spend some Saturdays there to feel less lonely. Mags is the only person I have here, and she is the only person that has me in a strange way. She works in a care home on the other side of town near the church, both back out onto fields that are not farmed. One day, Mags invites me to dinner, and I accept out of politeness. We sit in the White Horse Inn, and I discover her kindness, but there is something very fragile about her. Not much else happens in Howden afterwards, except flat fields of green that go on for miles. When the 3-month stint comes to an end, Mag says, "Remember me." The school bus to Cokethorpe. I see poor Westerman with his Harry Potter spectacles and egg-shaped head, who was a good boy in the first year, had read novels diligently. He got a taste for being edgy, and so stopped living in fiction and got into the action of playing to the classroom. Next to him was Tom Pott, who was more quiet and shifty. He stole mobile phones in the early noughties, including mine, and told me in PE months after he stole it. Behind him sat Nadim Abbas, who was also in the phone business, and did various deals in the school fields, where he gave punters goods at cut prices. They didn't always work. He also did the dirty exchange in a corner of the school corridor when the day ended. I saw a quick flash of silver notes. His younger brother Nassim got involved in the company, but specialised in CD players. He introduced me to gangster rap. The scariest person was Josh Welfs, a short, blonde and blue-eyed boy with a talent for violence. He clipped everyone in rugby. My best friend was Raza Dali. We once talked about the future, with GCSEs and A-levels ahead, the letters and numbers that would define our futures. Before we knew it, the bus stopped, and we all got off on our separate ways.
Adam Shaw's poem returns to the idea of love as a moving force, but here more at the substellar level.
Palm in hand, I feel exposed, the power of my words. Out of the verse climbs a wasp. What you heard is the buzzing of my limbs. Learn, stop guessing, teach a lesson. Got me thinking of your name, double L. Listening like my ears on the side. On the floor invites me. With the melody, school me. She said, glad you came. I am too. Smoke signals, urn, fire red. You got me inspired. Evoking poetics in your presence. You give me peace of mind. A smile that stops time. Eating Jamaican, feel I know you longer. Belonging, we breathe music. Love catches fire at the source. You are simply beautiful. Thinking of you, I am barefoot. Reminds me of the ocean touching land. I feel you in the waves. Home on the beach, burning palm trees. You got me glowing like an owl in headlights. In this moment, we are still, circling the field we can see in the dark. Two lovers spark by a riverside. She said, aren't your eyelashes white? I smile, say it's the light, flying through every colour, like crossing a rainbow. Singing in the car, rev the engine, smiling at every kite, thinking this is how it feels to fly. Love is the answer. Ask the question.
Our last poet is Lizzie Ballagher with 3 poems, which take us from the horrendous experience of a car crash through to the renewal of growth and the return of newts with the spring.
At 17. That year, what changed took place when I sat in the back of someone else's car, set out with friends who could already drive. 3 lanes ran like ribbons, the middle for passing other cars going either way. So dangerous, as I found out when our driver chose to leave the road, that or we'd all be pulped by oncoming cars. Too dark, too fast. We shot the ditch, ploughed through a hedge, crashed hard against the furrows of a field sown with winter wheat, then flipped, rolled, flipped in rain and mud, bounced, twisted, flung about, until I came to myself, 5 yards from the glass, the busted heap of metal, smoking wheels. I woke to watch the others crawl out while all I could do was stare, sprawl, speechless, choked with fear, tasting mud and grit. Hearing far off the wailing of some poor person who, it turned out, was me. Then testing the bruises, contusions, cracked ribs that belonged to some poor injured girl, but then, it seemed, belonged to me. What changed that year when I was back in my own body and thinking inside my own brain was that I knew I could not learn to drive, nor would I ever be a passenger along that road unless I was driven blindfold, gagged to stop the howling horror. Somehow, in 40 seconds flat, I was tilted, tipped, turned out of childhood's chrysalis, became a woman living in my woman's skin. Digging alone. My first time to dig the spuds alone. I'd come with the spade too soon and had to earth them in and wait for flower, then wait for rain. But when I turn to the compost box again, it overflows with sprawls of frilled potato leaves, while flowers shrivel. Time to see, to slice the shovel deep through loam. I catch my breath. Your miracle has happened, even for me. Pearl white, pearl hard, pearl glossy, but bigger, smooth as pebbles on the sea-worn Saxon shore. I've longed for the consolation of the crop. So, pause, inhale the smell of soil, glad in this snatch of surprise to find white globe lamps, inert, yet luminous in earth's thick darkness. Newts. They come in spring by night, without a sound, dun and silver shadows slipping between last year's rotten leaves, when flag irises shoot yellow arrows, when mud begins to warm, when the water's just right, when the moon's in the best quarter. One morning later, I see delicate toes splayed on the surface as they feed, turn, dive, leaving thin trails of bubbles. They are acrobats, quicksilver in the dark tent of spring's fevered lake.
And that's all for this episode. Poets' details and texts of unpublished poems can be found at poetryworthhearing.biz. I hope you've enjoyed listening.